Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Carla from MindPlore with Carla and Friends. I do so many of these, I sometimes forget where I am and what is happening. Today we are talking, and I don't remember the exact title, Jean will help me, but we're talking on how words influence the world around us, and how it's important that the words that we tell ourselves are words that help us grow in many ways. And I am very lucky to have Jeannie with me, and I have Kimmy Avery, who is an amazing NLP coach, and I believe Bob has some NLP behind him and in his belt. And I have Bob Choat too, and Manager is here just to make sure everything goes smoothly, and he picks up some nuggets. So, having said that, Jean, can you please introduce yourself and the topic, because you're so good at that and you know what I need to do. And I will mute myself.
Of course. Today we're talking mind shift, moving from the negative to the positive. As Carla said, it's about the words we tell ourselves just as much as the words we say out to others. And I found a few quotes to kind of set the mood. They go from the ancient to contemporary. I thought that would be good today. Start with the ancient, Lao Tzu. Life is a series of natural and spontaneous changes. Don't resist them. That only creates sorrow. Let reality be reality. Let things flow naturally forward in whatever way they like. I follow that with the great poet Maya Angelou. We delight in the beauty of the butterfly, but rarely admit the changes it has gone through to achieve that beauty. Remember the changes, the metamorphosis, that's important. And then a contemporary creative director from the Los Angeles area, he owns an ad agency. His name is Rob Siltonen, and he wrote, "The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do." So it's all about not resisting, recognizing the path we're going through, and knowing we can do greatness. That's how I read that. Kimmy, how about you?
How I read it, it sort of tags on a little bit more to what you said. It's an inner knowing, and you get to create things. You actually have you are able to create things when you have a sense of certainty inside of you. If you're divided in any way, if a part of you is thinking that the peanut gallery is right, maybe you shouldn't do this thing, you can't do it, you're not smart enough, you don't have the resources, whatever. If you're listening to that and a part of you says, I've got this mission, this dream, this vision, I really want to create this, and these two parts are in conflict, you're going to have the experience of an internal war rather than that sense of certainty in creating. And I particularly loved Maya Angelou's quote about understanding what the caterpillar went through to get to be the butterfly. I hear all kinds of very successful people, I've heard them for years, talk about the struggle that it took to achieve their dream. Knowing that there will be some struggle along the journey, and having that sense of certainty, that inner knowing, that's how you manifest what you want. Back to you.
That's great. Bob, how about you? What do the quotes come up, or the changing mindset ideas come up with?
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback on what Kimmy said and then add to it. And and where she started like really knowing yourself on the inside. Socrates said the same thing way back in his day, know thyself. And that's really, really important. And when we're striving to create the life that we want, to going after certain goals, it always starts with knowing thyself. And that really is important, to know your current reality, because a lot of people, they'll focus on that future, but they really don't know who they're at, who they are, and their current reality. And once we know that, once we know where we're at and we're honest with ourselves, now we can create that pathway to the life that we want, to the kind of person that we want to become, and continue that journey forward. I can recall years ago, back in my Marine Corps days, and every time we'd be on a mission, we had to know what was our circumstances presently. What did we need in order to accomplish that mission? Now, again, each one of us, we had to know our skill levels, where we're at, our competency level. What did we need to gain more competency, to go after, or to make sure that the mission was successful. So training was all part of that and everything. And then we had that step to step process, and so I was with First Force Recon back in those days. And then later on, I started learning, because we talked about NLP 40 years ago. About 41 years ago, I started in NLP back in my LAPD days, and I had to learn that journey. Where did I want to take myself to utilize this technology for my own future? So I applied a lot of the same kind of stuff. But again, everything, whether it's that and everything, and I'm, again, what Kimmy said, knowing who we are in that sense.
So why does it seem so, I'm going to just say, difficult for individuals to attain that kind of clarity on who they are, what they're trying to do, that there's an internal warfare going on, all the things that, as Kimmy and I have talked about, that I usually call them my blocks, the things that keep us from our good, the things that, stand up and become obstacles that we have to figure out how to get around. Why is this path made so difficult? Kimmy?
I think that there are a couple ways that I mesh together to look at it. We make it difficult because we don't recognize that there are many parts of ourselves that want different things. And we also make it difficult by thinking that that if a part of us wants something that we don't think the other part doesn't think is good for us, we think that part's sabotaging us. One of the presuppositions of NLP, or I call it an operating belief, is that behind every behavior is a positive intention. And when I work with my clients and they've got internal conflicts, I help them find the positive intention of the part of them that wants to play video games all day. I help them find the positive intention in the part that wants to write that book, or whatever it is. And sometimes there are more than two parts that have opinions or about your life. That sounds so strange to have it come out of my mouth, but there are different aspects of you that want different things. So these two parts are in conflict, the playing video games all day and the writing the book, let's say. Behind each of those behaviors is a positive intention. And when I guide people into their core selves, into the essence of who they are, by speaking with each of these parts, what does this part want? And what's even deeper than that and that? I've never had a part of them say something that really truly had a negative intention. It was things like, or it's always, oneness, God, Yahweh, Allah. Like they want that depth of connection. And when we get to that place, that depth, then these two parts can begin to speak to each other. They want peace. They want something bigger. And they don't know how to get there. And they think this particular behavior or that particular behavior is going to get them there. But then they're at odds with each other, with each part. So we bring them together and have them become a unified front toward that goal. And then you can begin to plan. You can begin to have conversations with your internal self, create a plan of action. Dr. Bob mentioned about being in the military, and I thought of planning, setting your intention, going forward on that mission, and coming out the other side victorious. But you can't plan if these parts aren't together, aren't working in harmony, in lockstep. If you've ever seen a military practicing on a field, they're in lockstep. They're totally in alignment in their demonstration. That's what we want our being to be, by setting that intention and getting all parts of you on board with that goal.
Kimmy, you just redefined what I call the committee in my head. The committee for me has always been those voices that you hear that keep coming up. They're the tapes that I've started naming, because there are certain thoughts that I have that I can assign to that my dad used to say. The ones that were like, you could do better. Why do you think that this is the way you should be? The ones that were always questioning me. And I have one that's really snarky that I call David Letterman, because it's that kind of David Letterman humor. And I have a whole array of these voices, so I just call it the committee. And yet now you're saying that that's really part of who I am reflecting back, and they're warring with each other.
Well, the power of words, they could be warring, or they could be collaborating on your success. Right?
That would be really frightening if David Letterman and my father were collaborating for me.
Well, what's interesting about that is sometimes a voice like your father's voice is something that you're remembering from your childhood, and using neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP, and our listeners might not even know what that is. It's the most advanced change technology on the planet. And what it does is it helps me as an NLP coach to help my clients to use their brains better to get better results. And I love that Dr. Bob actually was using it or studying it while he was in the police force. I think that's just so cool. We need more police officers who can actually understand people and help guide them in a way that works. And sometimes we have voices that are not, that we've sort of claimed are ours, or they haunt us, like our father's voice telling us we're not good enough, or maybe a teacher's voice, or somebody else who means something to you. And then there are exercises that we can do to lessen the impact of that voice. And sometimes that voice is a part of us that's using that voice to represent some part of us. I want you to succeed. And then in my father's case, he was a military guy. So when he wanted me to succeed, he told me all the ways I was messing up. And that did not work very well for me when I was a little kid. So everybody's different. And these voices can be of support or not. You're going to say...
I've redefined it. That voice is that my dad's language of love, because he was a military man too. And it was more about pushing you forward, even though it didn't sound like that. And I go back to things that you've said, Kimmy, about men and women should probably have different languages because we use the same words, but they have different meanings.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
so my dad's language of love really pushed me forward. But when I think of it out of context, that's when it becomes a problem. And so what this means is there's clarity for us if we look at things in a different way. Dr. Bob, how does that sit with you?
Yes. One of the things, and I'm glad that you both mentioned that you had fathers that were in the military. My father was also the same, career Army. And one thing about, like, I was able to break down his own beliefs, why he did what he did, and why he used to beat me up and then call me names and all this kind of stuff. My first broken nose out of 5 broken noses was from him. And it wasn't until, like, after his passing, he passed away in 1983, that I started, like, uh, wanting to know more about what happened to the kid that turned him into the person that he became. Because we all will bring in the belief systems from our culture, our parents, society, and so forth. And it turns out my father grew up in the Ozarks, and he had been beaten. His stepfather, who had been one of those old time trappers, and just took a lot of stuff out on my father, even using a bullwhip on him. So that changed him, and he ended up believing. He went into the Army, World War II, at 17 years old. I did the same thing. I went in the Marine Corps at 17 years old. So I had to recognize and being able to shift that. I had to look at my own belief systems. And to this day, I will ask myself regarding what I believe and challenge it. Obviously, are my beliefs based on factual evidence, or is it something that I carried over, including the voices in my head? Are they reality? Do they really pertain to me? If not, I have to tear it apart and break it down. So one of the things I work with my clients regarding beliefs is start to tear down those beliefs. Again, if it's not based on evidence, then you need to discard it. And a lot of times we need to install new beliefs and even surround ourselves with the right environment, including the people environment that's going to help to support us. And that's very important. I tell my clients, find the support mechanisms. Eliminate those toxic people out of your life that's constantly telling you that you can do this, including family members. Sometimes family members are our worst enemies, besides ourselves being our worst enemies. And that challenge continues. Again, I think all of us should start challenging the beliefs that we have, and then adopt new ones along the way. Again, based on evidence.
That's a good point. That's a good point. I often call that reauthoring, or as a writer, it's editing. You know, looking at, is that story mine or is it a story somebody else gave me? And then I'm able to reconfigure the story in my head if it's something I was given. Carla, you had your hand up, and you know it's your show, so I wanted to make sure I pass it over to you. You're muted. That's the 2020 quote of the year. You're muted, honey.
I know. And with that, I am going to ask you to pass it on to someone else for a moment, and I'll come back because I need to answer something for one of the panelists.
So, Kimmy, you kind of nodded like you had something to say there too.
Well, I just got a little distracted. So, trying to think of.
We were talking about shifting, editing the stories, owning the stories.
Yes. The stories, the beliefs, the experience that we all grow up with is unique. I like to see it like a person's a comet soaring through the universe, and they've got this long tail behind them. And that is their upbringing, their beliefs, their values, all of their history, their experiences, their what has gone on through their life. Maybe there are a lot of people who are 21 who were born during 9/11. They grew up in a very different world than the people who are our age, right? Over 21. Those experiences shape our lives, and they feel like the truth because they happened. So that's one of the reasons we get stuck. And beliefs, the meaning we tell ourselves about what happened becomes a belief. And that's one way that we can get beliefs. But that belief shapes how we see the world. So imagine you're a fish in a fishbowl. That water is your belief. It feels like the truth. It's not the truth. You can change that water and have a different experience. And beliefs are just thoughts you keep thinking. They feel solid. And with certain techniques and skills, we can change those beliefs much more easily than you could have ever imagined. And when you change a belief, that new experience feels like the truth. The old one, you might say, wow, I can't believe I thought that. I had the experience of, like Dr. Bob and maybe many people whose parents or father was in the military or parents. My father was told by a therapist when he got out of the military to let his anger out. Well, I was a little girl and he beat the crap out of me. Sorry about that word. And looking back at that, I had made the belief that all men were violent. So throughout my life, up until I learned this, I would try to see if I could trigger a boyfriend or men in my life to see if they were going to be violent, because I had the belief that all men were violent. And then I did an exercise that in NLP we call them processes, but an exercise where I went back in time and I was able to step into the shoes of my father and understand where he was coming from. He was wounded. He had been in a war that he didn't believe in. And he had taken his anger out on his little 3-year-old daughter. I was able to understand where he was coming from and able to forgive him and rewrite and change the story so that I could look for signs that maybe men would be violent. But my belief changed that all men were violent. That experience shaped my ability to have relationships. It shaped it so that I was not in fear all the time, because those beliefs were having an impact on me. And they weren't true. Not all men are violent. So you can change the belief. Well, another piece about that is if I believe that all men are violent, I will actually sort through the world and pick men who are violent because I'm looking for those behaviors. So then that I have the next experience of a violent person. My beliefs shape my reality. So when I changed that belief, I began to have a different experience and not only see violence. I began to see other experiences with men, and it changed my world.
Yeah, that it's very powerful, that example, Kimmy. I was going through family photos recently, um, and I had this gestalt kind of moment, this kind of, as I was looking at photos. I grew up, and I'm sure there are many viewers out there that have heard this, but people would say to me, "Oh, your face is so pretty, but you need to lose weight." And they would focus on my weight. And I looked at pictures of me at that time. I was normal. I was not heavy. I wasn't a skinny mini Twiggy kind of model. In the 60s, Twiggy was the big model, and she was very, thin. And, so I'm looking at these pictures going, where did that come from? And I'm angry because in my mind, in my belief, I'm always heavy. So it was like blown my mind away that was somebody else's opinion, and that became my story. And I need to keep going back to, no, I'm fine. I am who I am. The thing that we want to focus on, and I think you guys are talking about it, but I'm going to say it straight on, is moving from negative to positive. Finding those thoughts and those niggling little influencers in your head and saying, no, that's not right. Let me rephrase that. And taking an active role in changing your mindset, I think is what I'm hearing. Carla, I see that you're ready, and we really need you to hear from you.
And I've been dying to get into the conversation because I have a question for these NLP people. I have recently had an experience with it, and I know that it's a muscle that is developing. And the change that's coming, it seems to go so fast. And then you begin to live in life. And both sides of the story begin to be told again. How do we learn to stay on the positive side, especially if we know that the positive is really the reality we want? But the negative comes in. I had a conversation with someone this morning and saying, but remember this, you can't do that. And I was like, please, I don't want to hear it. And I got off the phone, and that was all that was left in my mind. And I was able to switch it. But it's not an easy ride. It's like going up and down a wild roller coaster. Kimmy can answer, Bob can answer, Jean can answer, but I wonder, because I know there are people probably watching right now who are wondering these same thoughts. And I will close my mic.
You can't think a positive and a negative thought at the same time. And each type of thought you think creates a physical experience in your body. I mean, this is one way to look at it. When like I said, that fishbowl, that becomes the environment where you live, like that water. You're thinking. If you're thinking negative thoughts all the time, they feel like the truth. They feel like home. You may not like it, but it's what's familiar to you. And your body literally becomes addicted to those kinds of thoughts. Okay. For instance, when you're worrying or you're angry, those chemicals sear the body the way acid sears metal. It's literally toxic for your body. But you're addicted to it. It's familiar. So when you change your thinking and you start to think more positive, you start to think of well, this part of me wants me to be happy, and I can do this. This would be good for me. This will change the world. This feels like my calling. We say something like that, and this other part says, oh, you can't do that. This muscle, so to speak, this part of you has been familiar, so it feels like the truth. And this other part is not loud and forceful, although it can be. That voice of your mission and your dream and creating something. I can do this. I should do a radio show. I should do whatever it is. I should write that book. I should find this career. This is what I want to do. This voice, this muscle isn't strong. So you've got these two parts competing. And the thing to focus on after you've done some transformational work is this voice is going to keep coming back, but it will be shorter and shorter and shorter in terms of its time. I find that it sort of resets every day, less and less, but I go to bed with positive thoughts. I wake up with positive thoughts. I intentionally do that to set the trajectory, the direction of my day. And this voice is like a muscle. So when we're strengthening our positive outlook, when we're strengthening our unified field, when we're focusing on our goal, our job is to keep reorienting and reorienting to this direction that we want to go on. It will become easier and easier. So it's in part, it's about changing the voice and making a better choice. Your brain will make a better choice when you give it new information. So you know, Carla, that that's the direction that you want to go in. So now you have this goal of this vision that you have, and it becomes, this is a better choice, and this is a better choice, but this voice might still come back a little bit, but it will become less and less until this becomes the better go-to place.
Yeah, I actually liked what Kimmy said regarding that, and the way she structured it. So, as a cognitive neuroscientist, I look at like the brain cells working together, and we know the adage that the brain cells that fire together wire together. So each day that you focus on what you want, and then you take the necessary actions towards that. That's going to strengthen those neural connections till they get like a ditch, and it gets stronger and stronger and stronger, and the other one gets weaker and weaker and weaker, and eventually you start moving towards that self. And regarding the brain, and as Jeannie said, that we're telling stories all the time, and combining with what Kimmy said and Jeannie said is that now we're creating a new story. We're a narrative creating machine in our brains. We've been that way. You can go back to the earliest days of Homo sapien, and we're always telling stories. Data means nothing and everything else like that. We can say all these kind of things, but we're constantly creating stories. We're creating stories about our life around us, whether positive or negative. We feed our brains with positive or negative, and it seems like if we're watching the news and things like that, we're feeding it with a lot of negative about the world around us, and we tend to gravitate towards the negative because of survival instincts, and we have like one major emotion, and that's fear. We're kind of operating on fear. A lot of people tend to do things based on that, and once we understand that, and I had to understand, how can I use that fear in a positive way? because it was a survival mechanism in combat. And Kimmy, I would surmise that your father was in the military at what period of time? Turn on your mic.
He was in Vietnam from about 1966 to 71, or
Got it. So we kind of overlapped.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went in 1968 at the age of 17. What was he in the Army or
He was
what?
in the Air Force, and
Air Force. Got it.
he had to bomb villages, which was, he tried to turn in his wings and they wouldn't let him. He hated what he was doing.
Yeah, that was, yes, I think a lot of us, especially when we look back at it, it was a war and everything. McNamara and his data people put all that together. So in your father's case, because again, like all of us, we're operating on fear, and that was installed into us, and it produced a negative outcome. It was for survival. But if we hated, so he it seems like he had he was incongruent with his own personal values, maybe what he grew up with, and then having to deal with that, and that pent up anger would build up. So we have to look at what is the fear mechanism that we're operating on, and how can we have that shift. And I know that I had that shift and was able to move forward. I operated off that fear as well. I can recall being in Lawton, Oklahoma, going through some additional training. This is additional components of my training after my first tour as a 17-year-old grunt. And I went into a bar and I got drunk, and I found the biggest person I could find, and I just popped him right in the face. And then I took on a whole barroom full of cowboys. Next thing I knew, I was in a hospital with broken ribs, another broken nose, and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, I did things that I look back on, and I was kind of embarrassed, but I had to learn to understand it. What was driving that for me on a personal basis? But a lot of guys who have been in those situations had similar kind of experiences, and I continued to grow from that. Now, that was a younger version of me. Who I'm now is not who I was back then. And while I have like pieces of it, and I had to create this persona when I was running an international martial arts organization, and they saw me as this tough warrior. So I kept that persona, that mask on as that tough warrior. But that's not my basis, who I am. So I had to learn to like address that, and I went through shadow work as well, and discovering that shadow side, and learning about that in order for me to move forward. So I did a lot of Carl Jung stuff and everything, and then I started working with other people in terms of shadow work as well. But I had to like address all those things, and then being able to shift my story as well. From what I had, the story I told myself back then, even the story I told myself, like 20 years ago or 10 years ago, where I'm at now, it's completely different, and my beliefs are different as well. So yeah. So and Kimmy, I'm sure you've gone through a lot of the same kind of stuff, especially looking back at your father and how that affected you, and like you said, with all the men that you were looking at, and now you've completely shifted in terms of that way, and the story you're telling yourself is completely different as well, correct?
Yeah, and it through NLP, it helped me to sort of put the experience with my father in a context of a memory from my past that did not have to influence my future and run it. But also, I kept it so I could see it. I didn't want to erase it and remove that from my mind, because it helps me to relate to other people, and it helps me be a better coach to understand the kinds of experiences that people go through. And that might be bullying as a child. If you experience that, and then that colors and affects how you see the world now, by understanding that that's a possibility and being able to empathize with others who have a similar experience, your world and your life becomes richer.
Yeah, I'd like to to play on that, but to go back to the Maya Angelou quote, where we don't always remember the steps that the caterpillar has to go through. And Carla, that actually addresses what you're saying. One of the things that I learned in the process I went through, and I leaned on people like Bob and Kimmy to go through some very significant changes. I still got more to go. We still have some work. However, what I want to point out is when we start to change, those around us react, and often in a not so supportive way, but they don't realize that. They don't necessarily know what they're doing, but they try to pull you back because that moment of stasis is what's comfortable. So, for example, I was going through a particularly rough divorce. And, I've said before with the listeners, my husband was an alcoholic and we had issues. And I found that my parents were pulling me back to accepting things that I shouldn't accept and accepting patterns that I didn't want to accept. And so the hardest thing I did in that whole process was tell my mother, I need a break. I need a week. I'm not going to call you. I'm going to take care of my baby myself. We're going to take a week break. And that was for me to heal, basically. But I also found that, and this is something we talked about last week briefly with Carmen, I needed a pattern interrupt. I love that phrase. I wish I could say I did it, but she said it, and I don't know if it's a standard in the psychology world or not, but I love the idea of a pattern interrupt. So you're going black, white, black, white, black, white. Oops, we're going to throw in some yellow. As the fashionistas would say, let's put in a pop of color. You change the pattern. Everybody else around goes, no, you got to go back to the pattern. You got to go back to the pattern. That's the way it's supposed to be. That's how it was meant to be. You have to come back. So they pull at you, and it takes some really strong inner fortitude, inner strength to say, I'm making this change. I love you guys, but I'm making this change. Jump on this train with me, or I'll see you around. And that is not an easy decision to make, especially with the ones you love. Believe me, I found it very difficult to say that to my mother, but years later, I thank God for this because I lost her last year, but years later, we actually became friends enough that we could have a conversation about some really controversial stuff. And she actually listened to me as one-on-one, not as mother-daughter, but as equals. So those pattern interrupts that we need to look for and experience are actually going to cause us some heartburn, like your friend saying da-da-da-da-da-da-da to try to pull you back. And you have to say, I love you, or, I care about you, whatever level you want. But this is my new road, and I want you to come with me, but that's your decision. That is strictly your decision, but I'm moving forward. Does that make sense to you, Carla?
Yes, it makes plenty of sense. And I feel that even though we're using what we can do to go forward, we sometimes still get stuck. And when we get stuck, it becomes like a roller coaster. And part of me wants
And that's when
Go on.
Go ahead. No. Part of
Go
you wants
on.
to say what?
And part of me wants to say, oh, this isn't going to work.
Okay, so there's two
Part
patterns
says,
there.
don't quit.
Yeah, there's two patterns there. One is that it's going round and round like a roller coaster. And the other is the pattern of how you react to it. And if your reaction is always, well, it's not going to work, I'm going to move on, that's where the pattern interrupt needs to start. And if you think about it, we only have one power, to be honest with you. I talk about superpowers and breathing and listening or that, but the real power, the one and only real power we have that says, I'm going to use my free will because that's what God gave me. The one power is to choose. And we get to choose how we react to something or how we respond. So if you keep in mind that this is my superpower, I get to choose, then it's easier to do that pattern interrupt, Carla. In the middle of the situation, we're going crazily round and round and round. We feel like we're in that blender that's just boom, boom, until everything's a frothy mess. But we can say, stop. We can flip the switch and say, stop. And that's the pattern interrupt. That's an important point of choice. Do I choose to respond chaotically, or do I choose to respond peacefully? Kimmy's chomping at the bit.
Yeah.
There are a couple things that you said that are so important. And one is that you always have choice. Choice is always better than no choice. When you know you have a choice, then you have the opportunity to choose one experience or another. Okay. Sometimes you don't even know you have a choice because that water, that familiar belief system feels like the truth. So you don't realize it. When I work with clients, the first thing I do is, well, not the first, I do this throughout the session. I'm always planting seeds, or attempting to. Always is an NLP thing. Always. 99% of the time, I'm planting seeds with the goal of loosening that belief, of allowing somebody to make the choice and suggesting that that choice is available. When I finish working with a client and I've done an exercise with them, I will likely say something like, the work we did today was very powerful. And you may know, or you may have an experience of the old thoughts coming back. And now you have a choice. And the timing from that old thought, the timing of how long you're experiencing the wallowing and the pain of the old thought will become shorter and shorter. It will become easier and easier to change those thoughts. So I planted the seed that that thought may come back, the old one, the unwanted one, and that they now have this new thought available, and the old one may pop back. No problem. It's not a failure. There is no such thing as failure. There's only feedback. The feedback is, oh, I've got to make a new choice. And I've planted the seed that somebody can make that choice. And your brain will make the better choice if it's got new information. Which is one reason why having a coach in your life or listening to people who've overcome challenges can help you to transform your life. You've got that team, whether it's a fictional character in a movie or it's somebody like Maya Angelou or Gandhi or Tony Robbins. You've got these experiences that you can tap into that give you more choice and allows you the room to make a new choice for yourself. But those seeds that I planted are the power of your words. And I do that with all my clients. I do that with myself. And I have a coach that I work with because there are blind spots that we experience.
That's
So,
cool. Go
yeah.
ahead, Carla.
So one of you needs, Jean, can you mute so we don't, thank you. So if that is the job of the coach, and I'm going back and I'm listening to Abraham Hicks, and I have conversations with the new people in my life who believe in me, should things begin to, should it become easier to make these changes, to remember, oh, that's old, go away, I don't want to hear you, shut up. And this is new, come on, tell me more. Is that what you're saying, Kimmy?
Sort of. When, as a coach, when I help somebody to see a new horizon, a new possibility for themselves, I help illuminate the internal conflict or the past trauma. We bookend the trauma so that they can change their belief and come forward and have a new view, a new look. If I were in the fishbowl, the new water, fresh water, gives me, with nutrition, gives me a new outlook, literally. When you change the story, when you change the meaning, for instance, the meaning, I had a cousin who died when I was 27. I was very close to this cousin, and he died tragically. My story that I ended up telling, I was grief-stricken, of course, because I was very close with him. I had an opportunity, I should say, or an experience of him coming to me in a vision. And it was very clear in this vision that my experience with him in his addiction was an ability. He didn't want anything from me. All he wanted was love. So all I could do was love him. In that unguarded, open-hearted love, I became a person through that experience that allowed me to be open-hearted and loving with my clients without judgment. We've got a lot of judges in the world. My job is to be non-judgmental, to be able to hold somebody like a container so somebody can grow. But I could look at that experience with my cousin and say, oh my God, this is the most horrible thing. And it was horrible. It was absolutely horrible and heart-wrenching and painful. And I can take that experience and that vision of my cousin coming to me and letting me know he was in my life to teach me non-judgmental love. Did my cousin really come to me? I don't know. Was it just a dream? Maybe, but it felt really real. And it created a new story in my mind about the experience. And throughout this process, before he died, and I was helping, trying to just allow him to be when I wanted to help him, I got very clear that caterpillars, when they weave their cocoon, become butterflies on their own. If you try to open a cocoon, the caterpillar dies. Caterpillars literally disintegrate and become soup and then reorganize and come out as a butterfly. Our job for ourselves and for the people around us is to hold the space so that butterfly can emerge, so that we can allow others to do the same. And in the process of retelling stories, making the meaning be something that is useful, or if more joyful, more positive for yourself, supports you in creating the future you desire. And I haven't said this today, but I believe there's a small voice inside of you. And I say small, not that it's not powerful, but it's the voice of the Holy Spirit, the divine, Allah, God, Yahweh, that something bigger that believes in you. That voice is the truth. We have to train ourselves and heal the past, heal those other experiences so we can truly listen to this voice.
Thank you, Kimmy. And it doesn't happen right overnight, but it does happen. And I think people think, oh, I had a good session, or I learned something wonderful. And yet, yeah, that muscle began to grow, but that muscle isn't totally as strong as we want it to be. Am I getting this right?
Yes, and it looked like Bob was about to unmute himself, so go for it, Bob.
Go for it, Bob. We're muting.
Yeah, so one of the things I learned from one of my mentors who passed away last month, you may have heard of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, the father of flow. Yeah, and he talks about regarding flow, because in order to get in flow, you have to challenge yourself, but not overly challenge, which creates anxiety, and you don't want to be like down in boredom. So you want to be in that state, but it's a challenging a little bit, because that's where growth occurs. So you become more competent in terms of what you do and everything. But really key is going back to what Kimmy mentioned about the butterfly and Jeannie as well, is that when we go through, or when a butterfly finally starts to emerge out of the cocoon, has that slit, and it struggles in order for its wings to fully develop and everything like that, instead of helping it to be able to come through. We need to constantly challenge ourselves, but not to the point of anxiety. But when we can do that, we're going to grow. That's building that muscle, so we get stronger and stronger and stronger. Just like when I go and I train and I challenge myself, and I've been doing parkour for almost 13 years now. So when I'm going over obstacles off of buildings and things like that, yeah, I do that, Kimmy. So yeah, so and then I have my my falls, like I did in 2013. I did a face plant in the concrete, and for the 5th time my nose broke, and my face is all smashed up. But I learned from that. What did I do wrong? So I learned that I needed to focus. So I started teaching more on focusing in terms of where you want to go, but you need to be focused on that instead of being distracted by all these other things. So I learned it. That taught me a big lesson, but it was a challenge I put myself through. So what can I do next? What can I do next? What can I do next? And in the martial arts, I've been doing that since I was 18 months old. And through each cycle of growth, I faced different challenges, and I grew from that. But I didn't go from white belt and did the black belt stuff, because that would not have worked. That would have been too much anxiety. So Carla, find, like, if you want to be able to move forward, how can you challenge yourself by a little bit, just by a little bit, and grow from that, learn from that, so you become more competent in terms of what you do, or anybody else out there doing that same thing. So those small challenges help to uh, propagate massive growth. Yes.
And I love that from you, Bob, because it's true. That muscle doesn't, we work out our muscle. The first day you'll think, oh, this hurts. I don't want to do it again, but you do it again until eventually it no longer hurts to work that muscle and you're growing. And I think many people make a decision to say, oh, this is my muscle and that's my thinking and it's unimportant, instead of realizing that your thoughts are extremely important and we need to honor our thoughts and decide which thoughts we want to live with, because that's how we create our world. Did I get it now? I'm hoping
You're getting
our
it.
audience is getting it. Yes, Jean?
I want to go back to Lao Tzu. I quoted him earlier, but he's got a famous quote that we need to pay attention to now that we're listening to Bob and Kimmy. And that's simply, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. And every step we take changes us. I often call it the ripple effect. And I'll go back to what the creative director said about those who are crazy enough to think they can change the world can actually change the world. Because every time we make a change, everything else around us makes a change. It ripples out. It just keeps moving. And we don't even know. I mean, there is a butterfly effect. The butterfly flaps its wings in California and it causes a tornado somewhere else, kind of thinking. We can be powerful simply by changing our thoughts. If we all got on the positive mindset trail and everything was positive, could you imagine how the world might change? It's just, instead of being anxious because we take, Bob's holding up a book, Changing the World, a framework. I can't read the rest of it.
For the study of creativity.
I love it. So my point is that even when we're faced with the news and it's horrible, and I can't tell you when I've turned on the news and it wasn't, but instead of going, oh, woe is me, the world is ending, we have to say, we need to fix that. We need to change that. We need to take a step. I recall having a conversation about politics with somebody, and I looked at her and my reaction wasn't, oh my God, what? I said, what are you going to do about it? And I'll be dang, she got into politics and is in local, doing local kind of stuff now and making big steps, because those small steps that make such a difference, Carla. So when you talk to that friend you mentioned earlier, who was kind of taking you back into more of that negative spin, just simply saying, I recognize this and I don't have to accept it, I can stay positive, is a huge step. And that's what we have to, if there's one thing I'd like to leave with everyone, it's take the first step. That's it. It doesn't have to be overwhelming. Take the first step.
And what Bob was saying is that it's sort of like yoga. If you are, you want to stretch a boundary, you're not pulling so hard or stretching yourself so hard that it's too much. Your thinking's the same way. You stretch it and you expand and you notice and you expand some more. And your people or the people around you, some will stay and some will not if they can't see the positivity or the direction you're going. And this is not just, oh, I'm going to think positively. It's about this internal transformation that makes it so you are a powerful force in the world in the direction you want to go in. That's the key. Using every experience, like Bob, when you described face planting and parkour, oh my God, you got some feedback. It was not a failure. And you were able to look at the situation and go, what could I do differently? I had an incident the other day with my dog. He got his paw caught in the fence and I had to help him get out. And he was screaming in terror. And if I hadn't been home, he probably would have chewed his paw off. And I had to help him. And I reached down and I grabbed him and he was flailing around and he bit my face. So I have marks on my face. So when I look at that situation, what feedback do I have? Well, I rescued my dog. That's awesome. He was fine. I had to have stitches. What would I do next time? When I think about what I would do next time, I think I'm going to bring a towel out if I ever hear him like that. A small towel that I can just wrap around his face so that I can release him without having his teeth meet my chin. That's feedback. I got the feedback from the experience, and I was able to find and think about what I would do instead. If you think of it as failure, you'll stop dead in your tracks. Words have power. Failure, feedback. Which one feels more possible? If I have feedback, I can do something. If I have failure, I might as well just die now, right? I'm done.
Thank you, Kimmy. And I think anyone watching or getting something, listening to it, will definitely. Jean, you need to stay mute for a moment. I'll hand it over to you in a moment. I really think it's important for us to learn to listen deeply to what is deeply inside and not those little idle chatters that other people bring up for us. And yes, Jean, you are absolutely right. We are past the end, so it is time to wave goodbye. We'll be back on Thursday. And Thursday, no one knows it yet. We're going to have Neville Gaunt and me and Jean and Kamran Rizvi. And that should be totally off the charts, although this was off the charts today to do. Thank you, Dr. Bob, for coming. Thank you, Kimmy, for being here. And Jean, just thanks for being around and helping me through some of the craziness. And can we wave goodbye? And we'll see you again very, very soon.